Ambassador Kethfar stood before the massive viewing screen in the Coalition Council chamber. His crystalline body trembled as he watched another star system die. The Vorthok swarm had consumed everything in the Meridia sector. Planets, moons, space stations all gone, turned into biomass to feed the endless hunger of the swarm. "How many refugees made it out?" asked Council Leader Nethsor from his floating chair. The aquatic being's gills fluttered with stress as he waited for the answer. "Less than 10,000 from a system of 40 million, Kethfar replied. His voice carried the harmonic tones of his people, but now it was filled with despair. The swarm moves faster each time. They learn from every battle. The council chamber fell silent. Representatives from 12 peaceful species sat around the circular room, all facing the same terrible truth. Their fleets were losing. Their weapons barely scratched the biomechanical ships of the swarm. Their defensive strategies failed against an enemy that adapted and evolved with each attack. Admiral Vithkos, the Coalition's top military commander, stepped forward. His insectoid features showed the strain of countless defeats. "We have perhaps 6 months before they reach the core worlds. Our remaining fleets cannot stop them." "What about the Andromedon Peace Accord?" suggested one representative. "We could try diplomatic contacts. The swarm does not negotiate." Admiral Vithkos replied coldly. "They consume. That is their only purpose." Kethbar moved to the center of the chamber. His crystalline form caught the light and threw rainbow patterns across the walls. "There is one option we have not discussed. The new world, the one our scouts discovered in the Outer Rim." The council members looked at each other with concern. They all knew about the planet the scouts had found. They also knew why no one wanted to talk about it. "You mean the Death World?" Nethsor said quietly. "The Class 12 planet, Earth," Kethfar confirmed. "Home to the species that calls themselves humans." A shiver ran through the chamber. Class 12 worlds were considered impossible. Planets so violent and dangerous that no intelligent life should be able to survive there. Yet the humans had not just survived, they had thrived. They had become the top predator on a world full of predators. "The xenobiology reports are terrifying," said Dr. Lethnar, the Coalition's chief scientist. "Gravity twice what most species can handle. Poisonous atmosphere to many of our people. Weather that can kill in minutes. And the humans, they hunt. For sport they fight each other constantly. They eat other living creatures. They also have advanced technology," Kethfar pointed out. "Their ships are built for war, not exploration. Every human we encountered was scarred from their violent world, but they showed no fear when our scouts made contact." Admiral Vithkos made a gesture of distress. "You want to invite barbarians to help us fight barbarians?" "I want to invite killers to fight killers," Kethfar replied. "Because we are not killers. We have never been killers. And that is why we are losing." The debate continued for hours. Some council members argued that humans were too dangerous. Others worried that they might be worse than the swarm. But as reports came in of more worlds falling, the choice became clear. 3 days later, the Coalition sent their message to Earth. 2 weeks after that, the humans arrived. The UES Defiance dropped out of hyperspace at the edge of Coalition space. It was a ugly ship by Coalition standards, covered in armor plating and weapon systems. No elegant curves or beautiful design, just brutal efficiency. Admiral Jake Morrison stepped off the transport shuttle onto Coalition Central Station. He was tall and broad, with scars across his face and hands. Behind him came Dr. Lisa Parker, a woman with cold eyes, who studied everything like she was planning to take it apart. Colonel Ryan Brooks followed, moving like a hunting cat, even in the artificial gravity. The Coalition greeting party waited nervously. They had prepared speeches about friendship and cooperation. They had gifts to offer and ceremonies to perform. Admiral Morrison looked at them for a moment. Then he spoke in the blunt way humans always did. "Where are they?" Ambassador Kethfar was confused. "I'm sorry," The things that are killing you, where are they? The swarm is currently in the outer ring systems, Admiral Vithkos replied carefully. But we should discuss terms of alliance first. Establish protocols, and no. Morrison cut him off. Show me their ships, show me their weapons, show me how they fight. Dr. Parker stepped forward. We need to understand the enemy before we can kill it. The word kill hung in the air like a physical thing. The coalition representatives felt a chill that had nothing to do with the station's air system. Over the next hour, the humans reviewed coalition battle records. They watched videos of swarm attacks. They studied captured biotech samples. The coalition officials explained their defensive strategies and showed their weapon systems. The humans said nothing during the presentation. They just watched with the focused attention of predators studying prey. When it was over, Admiral Morrison stood up. You're not fighting a war, he said. You're being hunted. The distinction seems irrelevant, Admiral Vithkos replied stiffly. No, Colonel Brooks said. It's everything. You're trying to survive. We're going to win. Dr. Parker was examining a piece of swarm biotech with disturbing interest. This is sloppy evolution, she said. Effective against herbivores, but it has obvious weak points. Weak points? Kethvar asked hopefully. Everything alive can be killed, she replied. You just need to know how. Admiral Morrison looked directly at the Coalition Council members. His eyes were the cold blue of Earth's winter skies. You called us here asking for allies, but you don't need allies. You need us to do what you can't do, which is, Neth asked, though he was afraid of the answer, hunt them back. The humans left the station that day to prepare their forces. The coalition officials watched them go with mixed feelings, relief that help was coming, fear of what kind of help it would be. Ambassador Kethvar stood alone at the viewing port, watching the human ship disappear into hyperspace. He had invited the humans to save the coalition, but as he thought about the cold look in Admiral Morrison's eyes, he wondered if he had just doomed them all to a different kind of ending. In the distance, emergency signals came in from another system under swarm attack, but for the first time in months, Kethvar felt something other than despair. He felt afraid of his own allies. Captain Ben Hayes brought his ship out of hyperspace with the kind of violent exit that made coalition sensors scream warnings. The U's Revenge was larger than the Defiance and looked even more dangerous. Its hull was black metal covered in weapon ports and armor plating thick enough to stop asteroid impacts. Jesus, Jake, Hayes said over the communication link to Admiral Morrison. This place looks like a vacation resort. Morrison's voice came back dry and amused. Wait until you see their idea of a military base. Hayes docked his ship at Coalition Central Station and stepped out with his team. Marine Colonel Amy Stone walked beside him, her uniform bearing the scars and stains of a dozen different worlds. Behind them came engineers, weapons specialists, and soldiers who moved like they expected trouble at any moment. The Coalition Welcoming Committee had learned from their first meeting with humans. This time they skipped the speeches and went straight to business. Your reinforcements are impressive, Admiral Vithkos said carefully. How many ships will Earth be sending? As many as it takes, Hayes replied. He was studying the station's design with obvious disapproval. Who built this place? It's got more weak points than a paper bag. It's a diplomatic station, Ambassador, Kethvar explained. Not a military. Everything's military now, Colonel Stone interrupted. You're at war. Start acting like it. Dr. Lisa Parker had been working with the Coalition's scientists for 3 days now. She stood in the xenobiology lab with Dr. Lethnar, both of them looking at captured swarm samples through protective barriers. The biointegration is fascinating, Dr. Parker said as she took notes. They merge organic and mechanical systems seamlessly. Dr. Lethnar watched nervously as she adjusted the containment field. Please, be careful. These specimens are still partially active. I know, Parker replied. She pressed a control that sent an electric shock through the sample. The biotech writhed and made sounds that hurt to hear. I want to see how it responds. 2 different stimuli. Is that necessary? Lethnar asked, disturbed by her casual approach to causing pain. Everything's necessary, Parker said, without looking up. These things killed millions of your people. They'll kill millions more if we don't understand them completely. She increased the shock. The specimen convulsed and began changing color. Parker made more notes with the same emotion she might use to record the weather. There, she said with satisfaction. Stress response triggers a chemical change in the biometal. That's exploitable. In the station's command center. Colonel Ryan Brooks stood before a holographic display showing coalition defensive positions. Admiral Vithkos and his staff watched as the human officer pointed out flaws in their strategy. You're spread too thin, Brooks said. And you're trying to defend everything, which means you defend nothing effectively. We cannot abandon populated worlds, Vithkos protested. Every system has millions of civilians. Dead civilians can't be saved, Brooks replied coldly. You need to pick your battles and win them. Not lose slowly everywhere at once. He highlighted several systems on the map. Pull back to these positions. Concentrate your forces. Let the swarm extend their supply lines. Supply lines? Asked one coalition officer. The swarm consumes local resources. They don't have traditional logistics. Brooks smiled for the first time since arriving. It was not a pleasant expression. Everything that eats can be starved. Everything that grows can be poisoned. Everything that lives can be killed. The coalition officers exchanged worried glances. They were beginning to understand that humans approached warfare very differently than they did. Engineer Pete Collins and his team had been working non-stop to modify human ships for extended combat operations. They welded additional armor plating and installed weapon systems that made coalition engineers nervous. These modifications violate the Galactic Warfare Convention, protested Chief Engineer Sothfar as he watched them mount a particularly large gun on the Revenge. What convention? Collins asked, not stopping his work. The agreement that limits military weapons to avoid unnecessary destruction. Collins looked at him like he was insane. You're being destroyed right now by things that didn't sign your convention. But the principle is survival. Collins cut him off. Everything else is luxury. He gestured to his team, and they began installing another weapon mount. We're not here to follow your rules. We're here to win your war, Admiral. Morrison called a meeting of all coalition and human commanders. The conference room was crowded with representatives from both groups, but the tension was obvious. The swarm will reach the Proxima system in 18 days. Morrison began without preamble. That's where we make our first real stand. Admiral Vithkos studied the tactical display. Proxima has 12 billion inhabitants. We need evacuation plans. No evacuations, Morrison said firmly. We're not running anymore, but the civilians will be safer if we destroy the swarm here instead of letting them advance to more populated systems. Captain Hayes leaned forward. The swarm expects you to run. They've been chasing you for months. Time to disappoint them. Dr. Lethnar looked uncomfortable. Your plan seems very aggressive. Colonel Stone laughed. It was not a happy sound. We haven't even started being aggressive yet. Morrison activated a new section of the display, showing human fleet positions. We've been watching how the swarm fights. They rely on overwhelming numbers and biological adaptation, but they're used to fighting prey animals. What do you mean? Asked Ambassador Kethvar. They've never fought predators before, Brooks explained. They don't know how to handle something that fights back with intelligence and coordination. Dr. Parker entered the room, carrying a datapad full of her research. I've identified 17 weaknesses in swarm biotech. Most can be exploited with modified human weapons. What kind of modifications? Admiral Vithkos asked. Parker's smile was cold, the kind that kill efficiently. Morrison stood up, ending the meeting. We have 18 days to prepare. Coalition forces will take defensive positions. Human forces will take offensive positions. Offensive? Cathfar asked. You mean to attack them? We mean to hunt them, Hayes corrected. There's a difference. As the meeting broke up, the coalition representatives talked quietly among themselves. They were beginning to realize that the humans didn't just have different tactics, they had a completely different understanding of warfare itself. Admiral Vithkos approached Morrison as the room emptied. Admiral, I must express concern about your methods. The coalition values all life, so do we, Morrison interrupted. That's why we're going to end this war quickly, instead of letting it drag on for years. But your approach seems so brutal. Morrison looked at him with those cold blue eyes. You called us because gentle wasn't working. Now you're going to see what humans do when gentle isn't an option. That night, Ambassador Cathfar stood in his quarters, looking out at the human ships. They moved through space with purpose and coordination that the coalition had never achieved. But they also moved with a predatory grace that made his crystalline structure shiver. A communication alert brought news from the outer systems. The swarm had consumed another world, but for the first time, some of their ships had been damaged by improved coalition weapons, human-modified weapons. The tide was starting to turn. But Cathbar wondered what the cost would be when it finally stopped flowing. The alert sirens screamed through Kepler Station as the swarm scout fleet dropped out of hyperspace. 12 bioships materialized near the system's edge, their organic hulls pulsing with internal light. Each ship was the size of a coalition destroyer but moved with the fluid grace of a living creature. All defensive positions, Admiral Vithkos ordered from the coalition command ship. Prepare for standard defensive formation. Negative, came Admiral Morrison's voice over the communication system. Human forces are going in. Captain Ben Hayes was already moving the Revenge toward the enemy fleet. Behind him came two smaller, human ships, the Falcon and the Storm. The coalition forces watched in horror as the three human vessels charged directly at an enemy force 4 times their number. This is suicide, Admiral Vithkos whispered, on the bridge of the Revenge. Hayes smiled as targeting data filled his screens. Amy, you ready for some boarding practice? Colonel Amy Stone checked her weapon one last time. Been ready since we got here. The human ships opened fire at maximum range. Their weapons had been modified based on Dr. Parker's research, designed to exploit weaknesses in swarm biotech, instead of the energy beams preferred by coalition forces. The humans used kinetic rounds loaded with biological agents. The first swarm ship took a direct hit and screamed. It was an actual scream that carried through space on radio frequencies, a sound of pain and rage that made coalition crews cover their ears. But the humans just targeted the next ship and fired again. Direct hit on Bioship Alpha, reported the Falcon's pilot, Commander Nick Turner. It's changing shape, trying to adapt. Don't let it, Hayes ordered. He brought the Revenge in close enough to ram, if necessary. Hit it again before it figures out our weapons. The second volley tore through the wounded swarm ship's hull. Bio leaked into space, freezing into crystalline chunks. But instead of retreating, the human ships moved closer. Revenge, this is Stone. My teams are ready for boarding. Hayes positioned his ship next to the damaged biovessel. Do it. What happened next would be talked about in coalition military academies for generations. Colonel Stone and her Marines used cutting torches to burn through the swarm ship's hull, and went inside while it was still alive and fighting. The coalition crews watched their scanner readings in disbelief. The Marines were inside an enemy vessel, fighting hand-to-hand with swarm bioforms in the ship's own corridors. This is impossible, Admiral Vithkos said. No one has ever successfully boarded a swarm vessel. No one has ever tried. Morrison replied from his ship. Your people always assumed it couldn't be done. Inside the bioship, Colonel Stone and her team moved through passages that pulsed like arteries. The walls tried to close on them, but the Marines used explosives to blast their way forward. Swarm defender organisms attacked from the shadows, but the humans were ready. Contact left, called Sergeant Dan Murphy, as something with too many. Teeth launched itself from the ceiling. He put 3 rounds into it before it hit the ground. Keep moving, Stone ordered. We need to reach the control center before this thing adapts to our presence. The bioship was trying to evolve defenses against the human invasion. Walls grew spikes. The air became poisonous. Gravity shifted to throw the Marines off balance, but the humans adapted faster than the ship could evolve. There, Stone pointed to a chamber ahead, where the ship's nerve center pulsed with electric activity. Plant the charges. The Marines attached explosive devices designed by Dr. Parker, not just to destroy, but to cause maximum pain to the bioship's nervous system. When they detonated, the entire vessel convulsed and died. Meanwhile, Commander Turner in the Falcon was learning that human fighter tactics worked very well against swarm drones. The enemy sent clouds of small bioforms to overwhelm him, but Turner had grown up dodging asteroids and Earth's debris fields. They're fast, he reported as he rolled between 2 attacking drones, but they don't think like pilots. They think like bugs. He used his ship's maneuverability to lead the drones into each other. When they clustered together, he fired modified missiles that spread biological poison through their formation. The drones began dying in groups. Turner, you've got more coming, Hayes warned from the Revenge. I see them, Turner replied. He dove toward Kepler Station, using its defensive weapons as cover, but instead of hiding behind them, he led the pursuing drones directly into the station's firing line. The coalition gunners hesitated for a moment, afraid of hitting the human fighter. Turner's voice came over their communications. Shoot them, not me. I'm the one not trying to eat you. The station's weapons opened fire, between Turner's tactics and the defensive guns. The second wave of drones was destroyed in minutes. Back at the main battle, Captain Hayes was discovering that swarm ships were vulnerable to ramming attacks. The biovessels were strong but flexible. They could bend without breaking, but they couldn't handle the brutal impact of armored human ships. All power to forward shields, Hayes ordered as he aimed the Revenge at the largest swarm vessel. We're going through them. The collision sent shockwaves through both fleets. The swarm ship split open like a ripe fruit, spilling biomass and smaller organisms into space. The Revenge's armor held, though the impact threw everyone on board against their restraints. Damage report, Hayes called out. Hull integrity at 80%, came the reply. Ready for another run. The swarm fleet was in chaos. They had expected the standard coalition response. Long-range weapons fire and defensive positioning. Instead, they faced an enemy that fought like a pack of hungry wolves. Within 2 hours, the battle was over. 11 swarm ships destroyed, 1 captured for study. The human fleet had taken damage, but lost no vessels. The coalition forces had barely fired a shot. Admiral Vithkos requested permission to come aboard the Revenge. When he arrived, he found the human crew calmly repairing battle damage and preparing for the next fight. How? Was all he could manage to say. Captain Hayes looked up from a damage report. How? What? How did you do that? We've been fighting them for 2 years. No one has ever won a battle that decisively. Colonel Stone emerged from the medical bay, her armor scorched, but her eyes bright with satisfaction. They're not that tough, just mean. But they adapt to our weapons, only if you give them time, Stone interrupted. Hit them hard and fast. They don't get the chance to adapt. Dr. Parker arrived with her analysis of the captured bioship. Fascinating, she said, completely ignoring the destruction around her. Their adaptation process requires a minimum of 47 minutes to implement significant changes. If you can kill them in less time, adaptation is irrelevant. Admiral Vithkos looked around at the human crew. They were treating the battle like a routine training exercise. Some were already making jokes about swarm fighting techniques. Your people don't seem affected by the violence, he observed. Violence? Hayes asked. That wasn't violent. That was efficient. Morrison's voice came over the communication system. All ships, prepare for departure. Intelligence indicates a larger swarm force is heading for the Centauri system. We're going after them, Vithkos asked. Of course, Stone replied as she headed for her transport. They're wounded now, confused. Perfect time to hunt them. As the human fleet prepared to leave, Admiral Vithkos remained on the Revenge's bridge. He watched the tactical displays showing swarm fleet movements and human pursuit vectors. Admiral Hayes, he said quietly, what did your people do before you came to space? Hayes looked at him with genuine surprise. The same thing we're doing now. We hunted the most dangerous things on our planet until there weren't any left. The human ships disappeared into hyperspace, chasing their prey. Admiral Vithkos was left with the growing realization that the coalition had not hired allies. They had hired General Kate Johnson's fleet arrived like a storm front, moving across space. The U's Vengeance led 47 ships of various sizes, all bearing the scars and modifications that marked them as human war vessels. The coalition's scanning stations barely had time to register their approach before they were requesting docking permissions and supply requisitions. General Johnson to Coalition Command came the transmission. We need fuel, ammunition, and biological research materials. Also, we're commandeering your manufacturing facilities. Ambassador Kethvar watched the human fleet arrange itself in formation around Coalition Central Station. Commandeering. But these are civilian facilities, not anymore, Johnson replied. Her voice carried the same cold authority that all human military officers seem to possess. You're at war. Everything serves the war effort now. Within hours, human engineering teams were moving through Coalition space stations and planetary facilities. They installed new communication systems, modified weapons manufacturing, and established supply depots with military efficiency that impressed and frightened Coalition officials. Pete Collins and his expanded engineering corps worked around the clock to convert civilian shipyards into military production centers. They showed Coalition workers how to build human-designed weapons and ammunition. These modifications will permanently alter our manufacturing capabilities, worried Economic Coordinator Beth Seck as she watched her automated factories being rewired. Good, Collins replied without looking up from his work. You'll need them when this war is over. When it's over, we plan to return to peaceful production. Collins stopped working and looked at her directly. Lady, after what you've shown the galaxy about how easy you are to kill, you think the swarm are the only predators out there. Meanwhile, Captain Danny Walsh had arrived with the Special Operations Division. His teams were already deep in swarm territory, conducting reconnaissance missions that the Coalition had thought impossible. Walsh to command came his transmission from somewhere behind enemy lines. We've located a swarm breeding facility in the Vega system. Sending coordinates now. Admiral Morrison studied the intelligence data on his command screen. The swarm wasn't just invading Coalition space. They were establishing permanent bases, breeding new attack forms, planning for a long occupation. How did you get this close to their facilities? Admiral Vithkos asked. Walsh's reply was matter-of-fact. We killed the guards and took their place. The Coalition officers exchanged horrified glances. You disguised yourselves as swarm organisms. Not disguised, Walsh corrected. We captured. Some bioforms studied their recognition patterns and modified our equipment to match. Dr. Parker's biological research made it possible. Dr. Parker herself was working with Lieutenant Commander Grace Miller in a laboratory that the Coalition barely recognized anymore. They had converted the xenobiology section into something that looked more like a weapons factory. The viral agent is ready for field testing, Miller reported as she sealed another container of biological weapon. It targets swarm neural pathways specifically. Excellent, Parker replied. What about the reproductive inhibitor? Also ready. One application should sterilize an entire bioship. Dr. Lethnar watched from behind protective barriers, deeply disturbed by what the humans were creating. These weapons could affect other biological species as well. Only if they have swarm-type neural structures, Parker said dismissively. Which nothing else in the galaxy does. But the ethical implications. The swarm doesn't have ethics. Miller cut him off. They eat civilizations. We're making sure they can't. President Nestor of the Coalition Council called an emergency session to address the human military buildup. Representatives from 12 species gathered to discuss their growing concerns about their alleged allies. The humans are demanding access to our population centers, complained Representative Kothmar from the Centauri worlds. They want to conscript our civilians for military support roles. They've established military checkpoints on trade routes, added another representative. They're inspecting all cargo for potential military applications. President Nethsor activated the communication link to Admiral Morrison. Admiral, we need to discuss the scope of human operations in Coalition space. Morrison's image appeared on the main screen. Behind him, the bridge of his ship buzzed with activity as humans coordinated multiple military operations simultaneously. What about it? Morrison asked. Your forces are taking control of civilian infrastructure. Our people are concerned about the implications. Your people should be concerned about staying alive, Morrison replied bluntly. Everything else is secondary. But you're treating our worlds like occupied territory. We're treating them like war zones, Morrison corrected. Because that's what they are. Representative Sothkai from the Outer Rim Systems leaned forward. Admiral, surely you understand our need to maintain some civilian autonomy. No, Morrison cut him off. I understand your need to win this war. Everything that doesn't serve that purpose is a luxury you can't afford. President Nethsor tried a different approach. What happens to our sovereignty when the war is over? Morrison's expression didn't change, but something cold moved behind his eyes. Win the war first, then we'll discuss the peace. The communication ended, leaving the coalition representatives in uncomfortable silence on the front lines. Human tactics were proving devastatingly effective. Captain Hayes led combined human coalition fleets in a series of lightning strikes against swarm positions. But the humans always took the lead, treating coalition forces as support rather than equals. Revenge to coalition vessels, Hayes transmitted. During a battle in the Rigel system, fall back to defensive positions. We'll handle the primary assault. Admiral Vithkos watched from his command ship as human vessels tore through swarm formations with coordinated precision. The humans fought like a pack of predators, each ship supporting the others while maintaining individual tactical flexibility. They make it look easy, observed Captain Tithnor from the coalition destroyer New Hope. Too easy, Vithkos replied, quietly. The battle ended with another decisive human victory. 12 swarm ships destroyed, their biomass collected for Dr. Parker's research. The humans had taken minimal casualties while inflicting maximum damage. Colonel Stone's Marines were becoming legendary among coalition forces. They had successfully boarded and captured 17 swarm vessels, bringing back intelligence that revealed the true scope of the swarm invasion. They're not just attacking randomly, Stone reported to the combined command staff. They have a plan, a structure, and they're building something big in the galactic core. What kind of something? Ambassador Kethvar asked. A breeding super facility, Dr. Parker answered, studying the captured data. Capable of producing swarm forces faster than they can be destroyed by conventional means. General Johnson leaned over the tactical display. How long until it's operational? 6 weeks, Walsh reported from his position behind enemy lines, maybe less. Morrison studied the intelligence data with the focused attention of a predator planning a hunt. Then we have 6 weeks to destroy it. Destroy it? President Netzor asked. That facility is in the galactic core. The radiation levels alone won't stop us, Johnson finished. We've fought in worse environments. Admiral Vithkos looked at the tactical projections. Admiral Morrison, the force required for such an assault would leave Coalition space defenseless. No, Morrison replied. It would leave Coalition space under human protection. The implications of that statement hung in the air like a physical presence. The Coalition representatives looked at each other and began to understand what was really happening. Ambassador Kethvar spoke for all of them when he asked, Admiral Morrison, what exactly do you intend to do after the war is over? Morrison's answer was simple and terrifying. Whatever is necessary to maintain galactic stability. That night, as human ships prepared for the final assault on the swarm's core facility, Coalition officials realized they faced a new reality. They had asked for allies to help them fight the swarm. Instead, they had invited a new apex predator into the galaxy, and now that predator was making itself at home. The swarm's main hive fleet emerged from the galactic core like a plague of living ships. 300 biovessels of various sizes, led by the massive queen ship that pulsed with the combined intelligence of the entire swarm collective. They moved toward Coalition space in a formation that spoke of absolute confidence and endless hunger. My God, whispered Admiral Vithkos as he watched the sensor readings. They're heading straight for the capital system. No, Admiral Morrison corrected from his position on the bridge of the Vengeance. They're heading into a trap. The human fleet had positioned itself between the swarm armada and the Coalition core worlds. 68 ships against 300, odds that would have meant certain death for any other force. But the humans weren't planning to defend. They were planning to attack. All ships, this is Morrison, the Admiral's voice carried across the human fleet. Remember, we're not trying to stop them, we're trying to kill them all. Captain Hayes acknowledged. From the Revenge understood. Amy, your people ready? Colonel Stone checked her equipment one final time. Around her, 300 Marines prepared for the largest boarding operation in galactic history. We've been ready since this started. The battle began when Commander Turner led his fighter squadrons directly into the heart of the swarm formation. Instead of engaging the smaller vessels, he targeted the massive queen ship's sensor arrays. This is Turner, he reported as enemy fire filled space around him, beginning attack run on primary target. His fighters moved like a school of deadly fish, weaving between bioships that tried to swat them down. The pilots had learned swarm movement patterns during months of combat, and now they used that knowledge to devastating effect. Direct hit on Sensor Cluster Alpha, Turner called out, as his missiles found their mark. Queenship is partially blinded. That was the signal for the main assault. The human fleet charged forward in a coordinated attack that targeted specific weak points Dr. Parker had identified in Swarm. Bio-technology. Captain Hayes brought the Revenge alongside a biocruiser and opened fire with weapons loaded with biological poison. The enemy ship screamed and began to change color as the toxin spread through its living systems. It's working, Hayes reported. The biopoison is killing their adaptation mechanisms. All across the battle zone, human ships were proving that. Swarm vessels could be killed if you knew how to hurt them properly. But the real target was always the queen ship. General Johnson coordinated the assault on the massive central vessel. All boarding teams, prepare for insertion. Remember, we need to reach the core consciousness. Colonel Stone and her expanded Marine force launched from a dozen different ships simultaneously. They used cutting tools and explosives to burn through the Queen ship's hull at multiple points, creating chaos and preventing the bio vessel from adapting to their assault inside the Queen ship. The Marines found themselves in a nightmare landscape of living corridors and hostile organisms. But they had trained for this. Every passage they entered was immediately flooded with Dr. Parker's biological weapons. Contact ahead, called Sergeant Murphy, as swarm defenders rushed toward them. But these weren't the individual bioforms they had fought before. These were part of the Queen Mind itself, more intelligent and more dangerous. "Hit them with everything," Stone ordered. Her teams used flame weapons, explosive charges, and biological toxins in coordinated attacks that overwhelmed the defenders. Ability to adapt. Meanwhile, Captain Walsh and his special operations teams had infiltrated the Queen ship through service passages that the swarm had never expected anyone to find. They moved toward the central consciousness with the silent efficiency of apex predators. "Walsh, to all teams," he transmitted. "We're 15 minutes from the target. Dr. Parker's viral weapon is armed and ready." On the bridge of the Vengeance, Admiral Morrison watched the tactical display as human forces systematically destroyed the swarm fleet. The bioships were powerful, but they had evolved to fight prey species. They couldn't adapt fast enough to handle predators who understood their weaknesses. 60% of enemy fleet destroyed, reported the tactical officer. Remaining vessels are showing signs of coordination breakdown. "That's because we're killing their central nervous system," Dr. Parker observed from her position at the science station. She was monitoring the biological weapon as it spread through the Queen ship's neural networks. Ambassador Kethvar and the Coalition command staff watched the battle from a safe distance. What they saw challenged everything they thought they knew about warfare. "They're not just defeating the swarm," Admiral Vithkos said in amazement. "They're exterminating them. Completely." President Nethzor agreed. "No survivors. No retreat. Total destruction." Inside the Queen ship, Colonel Stone reached the central consciousness chamber. It was a vast space filled with pulsing neural tissue and biomechanical interfaces. At the center sat the Queen Mind itself, a creature of impossible complexity that had coordinated the destruction of dozens of civilizations. "There you are," Stone said grimly. She activated Dr. Parker's viral weapon and threw it directly into the neural mass. The effect was immediate and terrible. The virus was designed specifically to target swarm neural pathways, and it spread through the Queen Mind like wildfire. The creature's screams echoed through space as its consciousness began to dissolve. "Viral weapon deployed," Stone reported. "Queen Mind is dying." Across the battle zone, swarm ships began to convulse and die as their connection to the central intelligence was severed. Without coordination, they became individual animals instead of a unified force. And individual animals could be hunted. Commander Turner and his fighters finished off the smaller bioships, while the capital vessels fell to concentrated fire from human warships. Within 3 hours, the entire swarm fleet was dead, floating in space as lifeless biomass. Battle report, Admiral Morrison requested. Complete victory, General Johnson replied. All swarm vessels destroyed. Human casualties minimal. Outstanding. Begin collection operations for Dr. Parker's research. The aftermath of the battle was eerily quiet. 300 swarm ships dead. Their threat ended forever. The humans moved through the debris field with the same efficiency they had shown in combat, collecting samples and salvaging useful materials. Ambassador Kethvar requested permission to board the Vengeance to congratulate Admiral Morrison on the victory. When he arrived, he found the human command staff already planning their next operations. Admiral Kethvar began, "On behalf of the Coalition, I want to thank you for saving our civilization." Morrison looked up from his tactical displays. "We didn't save your civilization. We ended a threat to galactic stability." "Is there a difference?" "Yes," Morrison replied. "Saving you would have been temporary. This is permanent." General Johnson stepped forward with a datapad full of reports. "Admiral, we've established human bases in 47 coalition systems. Security forces are in position to maintain order." "Security forces?" Kethvar asked. "But the war is over." "The swarm war is over," Morrison corrected. "But the galaxy is still full of predators. You've proven you can't defend yourselves against them. The implications hit Kethvar like a physical blow. Are you saying you intend to occupy Coalition space permanently? We intend to protect it, Morrison replied. Whether you want protection or not is irrelevant. You need it. Colonel Stone entered the bridge, still carrying weapons from the boarding operation. Admiral, we've secured all swarm biotechnology. Dr. Parker wants to begin weapons development immediately. Approved, Morrison said. Also begin recruitment. Operations on Coalition worlds. We'll need local forces for garrison duty. Recruitment, Kethvar asked, weakly. Military service, Stone explained. Your people need to learn how to defend themselves properly. We'll teach them. Dr. Parker arrived with her analysis of the destroyed swarm fleet. Complete genetic extinction, she reported with satisfaction. The viral weapon eliminated their ability to reproduce. Even if some individual bioforms survived elsewhere, the species is doomed. She looked at the Coalition representative with cold eyes. That's how you handle an existential threat. You don't negotiate with it or contain it. You eliminate it completely. Admiral Morrison stood and walked to the viewing port, looking out at the debris field that had once been the galaxy's most dangerous predator species. Ambassador Kethvar, he said without turning around, your people called us asking for allies. But you didn't need allies. You needed us to do what you couldn't do yourselves, which was. Morrison turned to face him, and Kethvar saw the cold certainty of a true apex predator in his eyes. Rule. 6 months later, the galaxy had a new order. Human military bases controlled all major trade routes. Coalition civilians worked under human supervision to build weapons and ships according to human designs. The peaceful species that had once governed themselves now lived under the protection of their self-appointed guardians. Ambassador Kethvar stood in his quarters on what had once been Coalition Central Station, now designated as Human Administrative Command Center 7. Through his window, he could see human warships patrolling space that had once been free. A communication alert brought news from the Outer Rim. Human exploration fleets had made contact with 3 new alien civilizations. All had been offered the same choice, accept human protection, or face the consequences of refusing it. None had refused. Kethvar thought about the desperate message the Coalition had sent to Earth so many months ago. They had asked for allies to help them fight the swarm. They had gotten something else entirely. They had gotten rulers.